Um, Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Yana Kubal. Today we have me a very special guest, Erin Moon. Erin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. I was so excited
Yay.
to have somebody else in your realm come on to the show for season three because that is one of the things I promised that I would do in season three.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm glad that we could talk to multiple people in your multiple fields. So that way, we can learn a lot more. I know I learned a lot with Amy. So, our conversation last time that didn't quite get recorded, but now it will because of tech difficulties. Um, I learned a lot then. So I'm looking forward to expanding on a lot of those things today with you and our audience. So thank you so much for coming. I appreciate, Amy reaching out to you and, you being able to reach out to me and we're able to get it figured out. So it's
I
awesome.
love how all the connections bring us together, right? In this
Yeah.
world of story. All of us story lovers. Yeah.
It's crazy after a while because somebody the other day was like, "Oh yeah, like so and so was talking to me about your podcast," and I'm like, "Oh," and then it's funny because like we had a couple authors that happened recently, like, "Oh, my friend, was on your show." I'm like, okay, and then they're like, "Oh yeah, this is my name, these are my books, check them out," and then some of them I've like read like 4 or 5 years ago on Google, like before I had a Kindle,
Yeah.
and it's like kind of fun,
Yeah.
what I mean? It's like kind of funny, so it's definitely a
Yeah.
small world. Like you think everybody's writing books, because you see so many people, but it's really not that many people.
No, and it's just
And
our world. Like other people are living
yeah,
whole other lives. And this is our
it's totally
community.
true. It's totally true. I've literally ran into three like voice actors who do audio narrations. And I don't know in the last 6 months if I ran into another, like physically another writer or author. Like, so it's kind of
Yeah.
crazy. Like, so it's still like, really small. So, but it was
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, where I'm at. But yeah. But anyways, I'm glad that, we could get you on. This is why I do the podcast, is to try and talk to different people, and learn as much as I can. So I'm really excited to, ask you these questions and share your experience with our audience today. So I'm excited to get going here. And we'll go right there with that first question. What has your journey been like as a narrator, actor, VO artist, and a coach?
So I've always wanted to be an actor. So my entire life, I think I saw Shirley Temple, I think when I was like a little
Mm,
kid. And then I saw Annie and I was like, okay, we're locked in. Like this is what I'm doing. This is
love
going to
Annie.
be, I want to do what she does.
Yeah.
And so I always like music was a big part of my life, but also I just always knew I wanted to be an actor or a marine biologist because, like what kid doesn't want to be a marine biologist?
It's fair.
And so I always kind of pursued it and music and marine biology took a definite backseat after that manatee paper in grade three. Um, and
How is
then
that manatee paper? I tell you.
I mean, I love a manatee, but that
Yeah.
was it. That was my marine biology time. That was it. Um, and then, so all through junior high and high school, I was either doing music, theater, or both. And
Mhm.
then I knew through all of high school that I was going to go to a theater program. Like I had my theater programs that I was going to take all kind of lined up, the options that were there. And then
Cool.
I was doing summer theater and auditioning for schools the second I got out of high school or before I was out of high school even. Oh no. I worked for 1 year between high school and college at a theater company doing everything but acting, so kind of
Oh,
learning
cool.
all of the back end.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I went to theater school for 5 years and I went to a conservatory program for the last three, where there was only 12 of us in the class and we were in school from 8:30 in the morning until 10:30 at night, 6 days a week,
Oh, wow.
doing like our actual classes were in the daytime, but then we would have rehearsals for projects and things like that. So, and that was 3 years and it was just amazing. It was a ton of work and really insular, but it was, I always say like the golden gates of school leaves you the opportunity to kind of fail, to be vulnerable, to try out all these different things before you go into the profession.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I was doing theater in the summers between school,
Mm,
Shakespeare festivals and such. That's part of how
yeah.
Amy and I know each other is
Oh, that's cool.
her husband and my late husband did Shakespeare together and I met my
Oh, wow.
husband in a Shakespeare festival. So that's how I know Amy actually. is through our spouses at the time. And so then it was straight basically like I met my late husband, we fell in love, moved to New York City, and pursued acting that whole time. And what was really interesting is about maybe like 3 years into being in New York, maybe 4 years into being in New York, I heard wind of a friend who also had a master's in acting, who worked at a company called Recorded Books. And I was like,
Mm.
ooh, I'm an actor. I love reading, but like a lot of people kind of think about this profession very simplistically when it's much more complicated. Um, but so I actually got a job there, and they wanted actors because we knew how to work with actors. We knew literature and story. We knew characterization. We knew accents, so that we could work with narrators who were doing the books, who were doing the audiobook
Mm.
narration on books. But they didn't love it if we crossed over from directing and doing the post production, because they knew they would
Mm.
lose us
Oh
as
yeah, yeah.
as the back end, because we're actors, and so we'd want to do that. And so I worked with just some of the most incredible people in this industry that really fundamentally made this industry. Like, I mean, they have narrated over 1,000 books, and Robin Miles, who's done N.K. Jemisin's books, like all of
Yeah,
N.K.
yeah.
Jemisin's books, right? Like, I got to sit for 4 hours or 6 hours a day with her. So it was kind of like getting that education through osmosis, and getting that education through
Mm.
looking at experts in the field working. And that was probably like 400 books that I worked on in directing and post production
Wow.
for 4.5 years, like, at least. It's hard to ballpark that one. But then I started narrating, and then I quit all of that work and started narrating and coaching, because I had worked with tons of new narrators by that point. I had listened to the person who, Claudia Howard, who ran Recorded Books for a really long time, was casting and really fundamental in books on tape and books in general at that time that were going to audio, and got to listen to her coach new narrators too. So I learned so much, and being a classically trained actor, and I was going and doing theater gigs the whole time that I worked there as well. So I was
Oh
working
wow.
as an actor. So it was great because I got to not have so much pressure put on my theater work, because I had this job that I actually really loved, because it was working with story. I got
Yeah.
exposed to all these genres I never would have read otherwise, because I, would get stuck in my own little genre world and like to just read that. And it was very expansive in that way. And so about 14 years ago, I started narrating. And then about 12 years ago, I started doing little workshops once in a while. And then I started coaching in earnest more often about a decade ago, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. And that's just because I've got that kind of funky background of theater training, which this work really takes everything that an actor
Yeah.
can possibly do. And then working with books on the back end. So knowing how audiobooks sound in general, and recorded
Yeah.
books. At the time, there was some books that were going to audio that was more kind of just like somebody reading to you. They were kind of monotone, a little bit flatter, keep the acting out of it, kind of. But recorded books was all about tell the truth, tell the whole story, make sure that you are adhering to character voice, so that I know who's speaking, and it's really supports the story, doesn't take away. So they were all about what audiobooks is now, and has been for quite a while, which is
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
sure, for the most part, there's always people who are going to be a bit more monotone. And there's always going to be listeners who like that. But I would say what I hear 80 to 90% of the time is more of that really intimate, vulnerable, truthful to what the requirements of that story is, wherever it is in the book,
Yeah.
performance, like full me living that story and you coming along for the ride, so that we're both just on that ride together. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I
that's
feel like it's
my,
definitely different. But oh, I'm totally blanking. I think it was David Eddings, whoever did his like original
Mm,
like audio, like on the tapes,
yeah.
like book on tape. I gotta say, like I forget who the narrator was, but he
Hmm.
was phenomenal. And then they ended
Yeah.
up adding like a female narrator too, who was like astounding. And the
Yeah.
two of them just crushed it. And they did like a every other eventually.
Yeah.
Kevin Hearn, he had a couple people. The one guy that like really was like the main character and did most of the
Yeah.
male voices was like phenomenal, but then he got a female voice actor in there. They were both just like just took it to like
J-
a whole new level.
Yeah. Well, and that's what's
Yeah,
so
it's
amazing.
definitely different.
Yeah, it's so amazing to me because, like, the amount of times that I'll hear back from an author who, because not all authors listen to their audiobooks. By the time it's an audiobook, they're like, Dear God, I don't need to listen to my book anymore. I don't need to think about that story anymore. I need a break. I need a break. Right. But then there's other authors who listen, and the amount of times that I've had an author email me and say, It is so bizarre to be so affected by a book I've spent years on and
Yeah,
torn apart and put back together and edited the crap out of, and just like at points just wanted to never see that story again, and then at other points fallen back in love with it, and then I hear it in audio these, the next year or even maybe around release, and that they're like, I can't believe that it's the same book because it's
yeah,
going through my filter. And like, yes, I'm trying to stay as close to I'm everything that I'm trying to do is honor the text. That is my job. I'm digging into that text. I'm doing huge amounts of literary analysis to try to make sure that I am honoring the deep work that this other artist has made, because I'm not the artist creator. I'm like the artist auntie. I like carry your baby for a while and make sure to see how you're parenting it
make a
and
great
parent it the
t-shirt.
same way. So I really work hard at honoring that. And at the end of the day, I can't know what you hear in your head. I can't know like every single nuance of every single sentence on what you felt when you wrote it. But if I do my work well, I will still fundamentally be honoring that book, and I will catch a lot of what you were laying down. And that's the thing about art, right? Is like you paint something and you can never know how someone's going to interpret it, no matter what your intention was
Yeah,
in your brushstrokes. And that's the same thing as reading. Like, we just with audio, it's different than when you give your book to somebody and they read it to themselves. You don't know the world they're building in their head. It may look
yeah,
completely different than the one that you have intended, but it is theirs and it is inspired by. So with audiobooks, I think it's the same thing. And I have, my pursuit is literary analysis. So it's a bit different than if I'm reading for pleasure. I just let that story just wash right over me. When I'm reading for audiobook narration, I'm meticulously trying to glean so many of the ways that like the author paints the page, and
yeah.
like I love looking at how different authors will use space on the page to help guide the
Oh, yeah,
reader. I
yeah, yeah.
love that. Like, that's exciting to me. It's kind of maybe it's the fan of E.E. Cummings in me that's like, ooh, I love how you're using the word on the page to make me pause, to make me draw my attention to this moment, all those different things. And yes, I love that part of it.
I never really considered that in terms of I don't know. I never considered that structure in terms of like the audio world. I feel like that would be really powerful. Like R.A. Salvatore does an amazing job writing narrative scenes, but like he'll do that and like one word, maybe
The
his spacing is a
paragraph.
little different than yeah, but like just like one word, like paragraph, and then like one word, and then
Yeah.
something else. But it's like it's just like boom. Like my friend says it, I forget who did his narration of the books for most of them. I think the guy passed away unfortunately several years
Mm.
ago, but no, they have somebody else. But he was amazing though. Like I remember listening to him from the library and just loving him. But like it's like the his pace was so good in the book, but I
Yeah.
love the narrator because he nailed it. I mean, it was like boom, 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 and then like there were certain scenes that hit you. It was like the nail in the coffin, so to speak, and you're just like,
Yeah.
whoa,
Well, and
and it
like,
like kind of rang, you know, like it's interesting.
yeah. Well, and it's the thing that I think it happens innately. I think some authors are intentional about it. And
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that also there's something innate because, writing is rhythmic as well. And you're creating without knowing it, you're actually like living a song, right? You're living like the
yeah,
rhythm of the
yeah, yeah.
long
It's a good way to
sentence,
put
then
it.
the rhythm of the short, and then, follow. And it's the only way that those things can be expressed. It's not just the words, it's actually the rhythm of the words together. And then and so that's going to lay out on the page in a very particular way, much, it's poetry with a lot more words.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think actually that E. Cummings reference isn't that far off,
That's a good one.
because
Yeah, yeah,
like that is happens to be a poet who really uses space specifically. But I
yeah,
do think that it's not something maybe some authors think about, but I also just think it's like innate in the way we tell story. We take pause, we nail down each word in a sentence. Sometimes that one word sentence, one word sentence, one word sentence, like, because there's no other way to say it or express it. And we just get
yeah,
that
yeah.
visual when we're reading, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting being a history teacher, you know, and I think of like oral, you know, people told stories orally
Yeah.
first. So I just
Yep.
think it's so funny. My friend wrote a very interesting article years and years ago. Um, and I remember reading it and thinking, God, this was a really good point, you know, with audiobooks like first being on the rise, you know, and saying like, oh, it was like going back to our roots or something was like the
Yeah.
title. And that was like the main theme. And I was like, God, he's so right. And he had so many great references from, you know, oral traditions and, you know, just different stories that, you know, now we have. And it was
Oh,
just, it was done really well. But I was like, it blew my mind. I was like, you're right. I'm like, we're like going back. His whole point was like, we're going back to the original form of storytelling,
yeah.
you know, just using the text to do it and
Yep.
technology to do the same thing that we originally started with orally. And I'm like, it blew my
Love that.
mind, you know.
If you
So
ever
yeah, so I
find that
think that has part
article,
of it. I'll have to
yeah,
track it
dig it
down
up
some
and throw it in the
more.
show. Dig it up and throw it in the show notes, because or
Actually,
email it
that's
to
a
me
good
or something,
idea.
because I would love, especially right now,
It was
as there's so
good.
much talk around AI. I would love, love, love
Oh, yep.
to highlight that if
I'm
you ever find it.
I'm surprised that I have to get a hold of him. I'm actually surprised that I haven't seen anybody really do anything like that. You know, and make that point. And it was funny
Yeah.
because I just think it's funny because I don't usually talk about it here, but I saw, you know, I have so many friends that are artists, and you know, it's funny to see people, you know, be like, oh, why are these artists freaking out about AI? And everybody was like, I feel like a lot of people in the writing community were like, okay. And then I was like freaking out for them because I originally wanted to be an artist and illustrator, and I have a lot of deep roots with the art community. And I'm like, without their art, I don't have ideas a lot of the times for writing.
Yep.
And I'll see, you know, a Magic the Gathering card or just something or someone's book cover. I'm like, bam, there we go. And it just keeps me going. I'm a visual writer, I guess you could say. And
Mm,
I then now all of a sudden, like people are like, oh, AI is like writing stories, and or you people are using it to write stories. I'm like, that's what I've been trying to tell you from the start, you know. So it's just always kind of interesting to me. But I'm like, I
yeah.
know it's like, you know, going to be one of those things. But I think that you made a good point there, though, is that like when I'm reading some of the stories that I've seen that you know, because I'm like, oh, I kind of want to see some examples, you know. And I don't know, I don't think that AI can meet that tempo. You know, it tries to copy what we were just talking about, you know, like that rhythm. And I don't think it can because it's not human and it
Mm,
doesn't have the oral tradition behind it or you know, that ability to, you know, like it does a lot of things with music, but it doesn't necessarily create, you know, the best of its own music. You know, it just has all
yeah.
these different
It
pieces and
just
just
is
redoes them.
repetition. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's
And
the thing that
I
you
think that's
can't
just, you know,
you just can't replicate, like, a couple things, like, you can't replicate this subtle impulse in the moment,
that's a good way to
because
put it. Yeah.
we live within our bodies, right? Like,
Yep.
so our
Yeah. Yeah.
brain is just deciphering, but our body is the thing
Yep.
that is living everything. And so in the moment, I prepped my book. I've done, as I said, all that lit analysis, and then I pop in the booth, and my fundamental job is to get on the ride. And that means in the moment I'm on the ride. Yeah, I've done
Mm.
my homework, but there's a point where I do actually have to throw some of that homework out so that I can live fully, vulnerably in the moment so that you get to go along with me. Otherwise, I'm just going to be telling you how I'm feeling, and that's going to feel like too much or too one note or all that. So I have to be so in my humanity in the
Yeah.
moment, and that means my body is living in the moment. And on top of the fact that you would never sometimes people don't realize, I think, how much subtext
Oh
is
yeah,
in
yeah.
writing. Even when
Yeah, yeah,
you've
yeah.
written a 90,000 word book, it still has subtext. Like whether it's third person limited POV, first person POV, does not matter. Omniscient does not matter. There is such opportunity and moments of subtext because of the given circumstances of the larger scene or the larger quarter of the book or the larger half of the book or even the story arc of the whole book, that I know that when she says, I couldn't believe he would say something like that to me in first person POV, and then I speak to him and say, I can't believe you would say something like that to me. I don't know, as a AI, I'm not going to know that I need to say that first line, I couldn't believe that he would say something like that to me. I can't believe you would say something like that to me, because one is to myself and the
Yeah,
other
yeah.
is to him. Or or I could say something different to him of, I couldn't believe he would say something like that to me. So, do you want to go get some milk? Is what I actually say to him, right? So that the subtext is, I can't just say that I couldn't believe he would say something like that to me and just be flat about it, because I'm
Yeah.
having a moment where I'm burying emotion. And the only what's the data set for the subtext of burying emotion within a line due to the given circumstances of the larger scene, which is, he is slowly leaving me. Right? Or
Yeah.
like, this person is slowly exiting my life. This person is emotionally unavailable and is continuing to do so and is starting to abuse or is starting to do whatever, because the books are not written about the mundane, they're written about the big stuff. And it's like
Yeah,
there
yeah.
is no way to glean that level of subtext, and that's what we feel.
Yeah.
So there's no data set that's ever going to capture that level of true nuance. And I mean,
Yeah,
every time
yeah.
I've listened to it, it's like I listen to it for a minute, it's all right, and then my body actually feels sick, because it's so, I can tell so much that there is nothing going on. There is nothing behind the veil. Like
Once
there's
I
just
thought about a
nothing.
lot of the texts that I've read, I'm like, because
Yes.
again, I think I think you put it really well. We're living within our own bodies, right? But you're doing that with writing too,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I think between the two, and that's where like, I don't know if I said in our private conversation last time, but I think I did, where there was like, or I was just talking with a friend. I'm like, he's like, oh, he brought up this book, and I'm like that original narrator, because at the time I was like, oh, I had like an Audible credit, and I was
Hmm.
like, oh, I'll do it, And before this author switched to this narrator years ago, it was the original one. Horrible. I mean, just pulled me out of the book. There
Hmm.
were so many, wasn't doing anything like we just talked about, and I think it was just like a big name actor,
Hmm.
who decided to do a book,
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that there was another actor though that I would say it's an amazing job acting. And I
Hmm.
don't want to say the actor because it's give away the book, but in the
Yeah.
series, but just tremendous job. So once I read the first several books, now I actually go back and listen to the updated audiobooks every time, because he adds so many nuances and blows my mind. Like I'll just read the book, I'll take about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and then I'll go and listen to the audiobook, and it deepens the understanding, it deepens my level. And people go, why do you do that? Like, you have a kid, you don't have time. I'm like, there's certain audiobooks I just don't want to take the chance, right, where they're going to
Yeah.
pull me out. And I almost didn't start the series over again physically, reading in
Yeah.
some way. But I've had such a good luck recently with reading great books that have been, and I like to study those nuances and just different things and how they do structure and, what I was feeling. But then I like to then go, And because I feel like a lot of times, the work you guys are doing with the author, you're really like, checking in on those things, and really getting, I think, a lot more of the time, personally, from what I've talked to a lot of authors with their audiobooks, more, I would say, from the words, you're getting more of the clear message, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Of what they like we were just talking about, So to me, it just adds a whole new context to what people are writing. And I like to read, and I like to read, talk to the author. I like to read their stuff, and then I like to listen to their audiobook. And I gotta say,
Yeah.
it adds such a deeper level depending on who they had do it. And I've just gotten
Yeah.
really lucky lately with great narrators and actors and just producers.
Yeah.
And it's been very enjoyable. My Audible experience
It's
is
so
way more
great.
enjoyable now. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and like
yeah,
and with audiobooks, just like anything, oh gosh, like any form of art or anything that's performative at all, we're all gonna lean toward, we're all gonna have like things that we like and things that we don't like because of like 1,000 things that have happened in our life. We're gonna be, oh
yeah,
no, I really don't like it when, narrators have this kind of thing going on, or I really don't like it when
yeah,
they do
yeah,
this, or, and we're gonna like listen for a little while. And the thing I always say to people is, um, try to at least get through the first chapter of any audiobook you're listening to, because we also entrain to people. So I make the example of, when you meet somebody and there's some people you fall in love with right away. You're like, "Oh my God, we're going to be friends. I love you so much." Like we are old souls. I know you somehow. I don't know why, but everything in my body says, "Yes. I like you, are going to be a friend." Yes. And sometimes that's a positive outcome and sometimes that's a negative outcome, but such is life. And then other times you meet somebody and you're like, I'm not sure. And then you meet them again, and then you meet them again. And by that third meeting, you're like, oh, I get you. Or, oh, you take a little while to open up, just like books do. Like there are some books that do not open strong purposefully,
true. Yeah,
right? Like, how long does it
yep.
take the turtle to get across the road, right? Grapes of wrath. Like, it just, there are certain books that just,
Speaking of a book,
oh my Lord. Yeah, I did.
loved it at the end. But
I will admit, I ended up Coles noting that in high school because I could not get through that bloody chapter.
oh,
Um, so it's just that, and that's the way we are. And sometimes we take longer to warm and sometimes not. And then
yeah, yeah,
if you don't like the way somebody is, it's performance, it's art. Put it down, pick up the book instead or do something else. But like, I love, for me, it's one of the only ways I have time to consume story. And
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so even if like the narrator isn't my absolute favorite type of narrator, I'll still listen to it because of exactly what you said, the nuance that is available. Um, there's something about oral storytelling. I'm not plot consuming, so I'm not like putting it up to a very high speed. And that being said, I don't have neural diversities that need that, because there are some neural diversities that need people to listen to
yeah, yeah,
the
yeah,
audio
totally.
faster, and that's all good. We do not record it at that speed because the brain and mouth will not work that way, and emotion takes time. But I love listening to it one for one because I love the nuance that's available when you're sitting around the campfire and hearing a story. And that's yeah, I agree. It can really lift it even more than when I'm reading and I'm world building. Like I'm hearing voices in my head when I
Yeah,
read,
yeah.
but there's something about oral storytelling.
Yeah, yeah. What's like Patricia Briggs? I once I discovered Moon Called, I think I
Mm.
finished me, and I was busy too, like the night that I started reading. I was like, I didn't have enough time. I
Yeah.
I got done with work at like 10. I was up till like 1:30, I think, and I had to work the
Oh
next day.
wow.
Yeah, like I mean, I 53 pages, 60 pages, and then the next day and a half I consumed. And I just love her. She's so free flowing, and I
Mm.
just was not anticipating like loving her audiobooks as much as the books. And the narrator she got was just phenomenal.
Mm.
Um, I mean, just absolutely phenomenal. And I loved it. And I haven't listened to her secondary series. in the same Mercy Thompson world, Alpha and Omega yet, but I want to. But I just, yeah, just absolutely amazing. They're some of my favorite books to read and then to listen to. Like usually I wait till I'm on like a plane or something like that because
Yeah, 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 yeah.
nowadays, ever since my thyroid problem, I don't do well on planes. So, but listening to
Oh,
that narrator calms me down very, very well. And I'll
yeah.
just sit there and listen. And I'm used to the story because I've read the story a couple times, and I listened to the audiobook a couple times. So I'll listen to it over and over again. But that lady just calms me down. Like, and I can just
That's
focus,
so
and
wonderful.
it's really a great experience. So I'd recommend if anybody hasn't listened to her books yet to check out her audiobooks. They're really, really good. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's I think what it's interesting too, like what you were saying, like there are some people who are just like, oh yeah, and that's like there's a couple of narrators where I'm like, yeah, like I don't even care what you narrate, it could be like the most boring book of all time, not even like a real book, like a
Yeah,
reference book, and I would just listen,
something about them.
and yeah,
Yeah, yeah, I love that
yeah, there's just some
intangible.
people like
Yeah,
Morgan Freeman, I don't care what Morgan Freeman can narrate the most boring parts of my life, right? And they will sound magnifique. And
yeah,
I have a kid here actually where I'm like, why are you not doing audio narrations? I'm like, you
yeah.
have my old teacher used to say that, drama teacher, be like, you have a radio voice. I'm like, okay, whatever. And it's funny, like he passed away a few years ago, but it's funny now I do this. So I'm
Yeah,
thinking he's up there like laughing at me.
yeah, going, haha, I
Um
told you so.
yeah, told you so. So it's so funny. But yeah, but it's just interesting where there are just some people with their voice. Like there was a girl that was I didn't teach her, but she was a student at a school I taught at. And oh my God, the first time she opened her mouth to sing, like If I Were a Boy by Destiny or whatever, Beyonce, she's ruined music for me. Like ruined music for me. And I feel
Wow.
that's how some people are audio narrating, like they just do such a great job conveying, you know, just so much. And I've talked to a couple authors about this too, their audiobooks and a couple recently were like, yeah, like, the person did just such a good job of it just blew their minds. So I
Yeah,
think it's cool when you can blow an author's mind, and
yeah,
really deepen the story from, just what you guys are able to do with just a text, or
yeah,
some sort of indication. So I think
yeah,
some people like me, like I write it almost like a script, if that makes
yep,
sense, because
yep,
that's what I originally did was a script. And then used to write scripts. So I think that sometimes I still think of it like that. And then I can't wait to do, my own audiobooks one day because I think it'll be cool to hear people deep in stuff for me too that I
yep.
wrote, if that makes sense. And I've
Totally.
talked to a lot of
That's the
authors
thing.
that have said
It's
that.
so
So
fascinating. Like I love that.
yeah.
It's part of what I love about the direction that audiobooks has gone. There's other things that are a bit rougher to take, but one of the things I love is that I get much more author interaction now. And like I just did a 9 book series, a fantasy series, urban fantasy series for a woman who actually lives in the same region as me. And the
Oh,
books
cool.
actually take place 2 blocks from my house, which is really, really cool.
That's
So I
cool.
see the locations that are in the book all the time, and they will
I love that.
now
Yep.
forever be me being Jade, being chased by the vampire who slams me up against the stanchion of the bridge, and I don't even know my power yet, and like am able to protect myself, and they're very
That's
fascinated, and
cool.
I'm like, I've crossed that bridge a lot, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I bike past that exact stanchion so often, and I get to be Jade for a moment and kind of feel into that space, which is so so cool. And she just finished the series the other day listening to it, and she posted herself bawling on the small end of weeping because she had actually had to stop the book and have a complete weep fest. And then she came on to do a post of, this is me crying listening to my own damn book because this narrator is destroying me. And I was like, I had to speak. I just blamed her right back. I was like, do you know how long it took me to record that book? Because I was a mess.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, because it's like, especially the culmination of a series when the big emotional stuff is really
Oh,
coming out, and
totally.
especially it's usually the softer emotional stuff as opposed to the harder emotional stuff by that point in a series. It's the like deep, squishy, soft spaces, and um that's a place that I like to hang out, and and it was so it's always so interesting to me when authors either say, I it was so weird. It was like it was somebody else's book I was listening to, even though
Yeah,
they know
yeah.
it really well, but as a compliment, not as a
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
what did you do with my book? Um and or to have an author crying at, like, this is a book she has spent years on. This is a series
Yeah,
she
yeah.
started writing a decade ago. It was released a decade ago, and then she finished up the series in the last few years. So it's fascinating to me that we get to work together as artists that way and feed back
Yeah.
into the loop of the story that way. Like, because that's, I mean, it's, I believe the fundamentals of this work of sharing story in any capacity is to build compassion and empathy in our world.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that through story journeys. um, and so the fact that that actually occurred to the person who wrote the book it's a testament also to her writing, because I
Yeah,
don't
yeah,
have
yeah.
anything to work with unless I have the writing, right? So
Yeah.
everything I'm doing, that's just your writing. It just is. It's just different, coming to you from a different place, maybe. Or yeah, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. I love that about what we do. Yeah.
What is interesting because I always think it's like, because I was just talking to author about this the other day because she had listened to her audiobook and for the first time, and and I just happened to see it, so I was like, oh, let's just talk privately. So I like, was chatting her on Twitter or whatever, or Instagram, forget, and I was like, yeah, like, because like I have my artists like Caleb, Gosens, I'll send him something and he just does like this amazing job, bringing what I have in my head to life,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
her and I discussed that, but she's like, it's just so different. And then like, and and she was talking about different nuances with it. And I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And I think it's different when you can see something, like on a screen or, like
Mm, mm,
paper or the book versus somebody actually bringing characters to life through emotion, and
yeah, yeah,
the one series I love listening to is like Jim Butcher. And I think I'm on book 7. Oh my God. Or book six, I think it was like 2 books ago, what I was reading. And I was crushed by the narrator. I had just read the book and then I had, listen, I was like, bam, 3 weeks. I was like
yeah,
ready to go. I was like, I need to listen to this again. And both book 6 and 7 for like the Harry Dresden Files, like the audio narrator, like he crushed me, like
mm,
crushed me. I
mm,
I have not been able to go to the next book to read it
mm.
because I'm still and this is like probably like before my son was born, like right before. I think it was the
Yeah,
series I was listening on audio right before, and I still haven't been able to go back and read the book because I'm just like, I don't know how I'm going to come back from
yeah,
the feelings that he made me
yeah,
feel.
yeah,
Um, I have to go
yeah,
back soon because I want to, like get caught up with the series and stuff. But I was just like, oh my God. Like there was one point I was in my car and I had gotten done right before the end of the book when something happens. And I was just like so emotionally damaged.
yeah,
I just sat there for like 15 minutes because I don't know what I was doing. I was like, I can't handle the outside world right now,
yes,
And I was like, that's powerful,
yeah,
And I was like, I was like, that's why I like audiobooks. People ask me, like, why do you do it this way? I'm like, I do it this way because, I was like, I like to get wrecked by emotion,
yeah, yeah,
really,
yeah,
certain books. But
yeah,
it was just yeah, it was very, very it was an interesting experience because I think that was I've had other books that I've really enjoyed, and stuff, but that one like ruined me.
yeah,
Like ruined me. Where now it's been close to a year actually. It was like last December. I remember it was like right before Christmas break. So it was like December 17th or 18th, something like that.
mm.
And yeah, I still haven't gone back. So I'll go
Yeah,
back
you're
soon.
ready.
But
You're
I just
ready.
think it's powerful. Yeah, like, but it's like
Yeah,
it's powerful, to ruin a grown man's emotions for a year just by your
yeah,
words.
right.
I think
And I
about like
think,
the Monty Python skit, like your mother's a
yeah,
hamster, like that kind of thing.
you
But
ruined
yeah, it's
me.
just yeah,
Yeah,
you
I
ruined
think
me.
it's
It's
I
interesting.
think it's the elements of the muse, like
Mm.
different people, talk about how some people, believe in the muse, don't believe in the muse. I deeply believe in the muse. But
Yeah,
because it's
that
like
could
a
be a whole
download.
podcast.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
a
yeah,
entire download, right? Of that's whether it's parts of your brain that are coming together in a magical moment and they finally like come to fruition and create this like download of story information, image and otherwise, or if it is indeed coming on the wind and we live in some crazy string theory world and we don't know, right? So
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
whatever the muse is,
Yeah.
in any way that I kind of wonder, because I think of the muse like coming through an author or writer, and that writing down and then like of course all the edits and everything, but that's just one element of the muse. It's that muse going whook onto the page, but then there's the next element of it then transferring right onto the next person. And I think, and I wonder if, you know, since we're in fantasy and sci-fi lover land, I wonder if there is also essentially a being of the muse or an aspect of the muse that is also auditory, like that part of what you're
Mm-hmm.
feeling and why we both are so attracted to having. I love reading and I love listening to story. So I wonder also if there's an element of the muse that it's like next placement into the ether again is to be made oral, like to be audible in some way, that it's like it comes in, it gets laid down, and then it's meant to lift off again into like a human to human connection, because you're getting nothing visual, right, when I'm reading you an
Yeah.
audiobook or when I'm living an audiobook with you, but we just decide together to be on that journey, you know, that we decide in that same way as when you're reading, you kind of like some people will place themselves inside the protagonist and some people will watch the protagonist, same thing as in dreams. And I feel like in
Yeah.
audio it's very similar, where like I can either be really close to you and watching you the whole time, or I can be with you when I'm listening. And I wonder if that's just, it's like another element of that same muse. It hasn't like had its full its full way into the world yet. It
Yeah.
needs
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
come into audio too. Yeah, because I feel that same thing. I've been just destroyed by audiobooks where I'm walking down the street and I'm either laughing out loud, weeping.
I always love the looks people give me when I'm listening to something. I'm just like laughing. My wife will come in sometimes. She'll be like, "Oh, listen to audiobook, or did the kid do something?" I was like, "Oh, listen to this audiobook."
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh,
It is an
cool.
interesting concept though, because I had a friend. Oh my gosh, he had the idea from Brendan Fraser did the movie based off the book Ink Spell, where like
Mm,
all the characters are real from a different world, and the author was like writing them, or then they became real. Anyways, so he had an
mm,
idea. He's like, what if all the stories that people tell like are actually real? And you're just
mm.
getting them from,
From the
like
next
you're
string
just telling
over.
them. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And
I
it was like
love that.
so, yeah. And I
I
don't know if he
love
ever ended up
that.
finishing because he stopped. I have to track down the author, but he stopped like he's like, I'm done with Facebook. I'm like, okay. Now I do a podcast, so it's kind of ironic, but I'll have to track him down, but and see if he ended up finishing. But he was in a writers group I was in on Discord, and I was like, that is such an interesting, and I'm never been able to let go of that idea. And it's just such a cool cultural diffused idea, and
Yeah.
I I think back to like Conan, and I loved the story of Conan the
Mm,
Barbarian and Robert E. Howard. It was in Dark Horse Comics, and it goes to what you're saying, and like it was just so interesting. I love this story where like Robert E. Howard's friends would his buddy would come out to the farm where he was living, and he would sometimes watch him while Robert E. Howard was, like doing his writing sessions. And he would watch him, and he said he would like perk his ears and kind
mm,
of turn his head. And it was almost that he was listening to Conan telling the stories. And one of the coolest reasons that the stories are not that are episodic and not in order is because it's like he said that it was almost like he asked him one day, he's like, "Oh, Conan sometimes just tells me random tales and I write them down." It's like a
yeah.
friend saying, "Oh, remember this time?" And God, that just stuck with me. And
Yeah.
it just was. And then when my friend said that, I was like, that's interesting. And I don't know, like sometimes, I'll try to write something and I wonder like if it's just this natural thing with writer's block or something. I used to get writer's
Mm,
block and now I don't because I'll move on to something else. And it's almost like I'm having a conversation with you and you're my character. Maybe I go to this character and
yeah.
maybe you just don't want to talk today, or something. So now
Yeah.
I go to which ones talk to me. And it's funny that you say that because I just think of that now, and that's how I have been pushing forward with a lot of different things, all at the same
Yeah.
time. Is because sometimes, and I've talked to a lot of authors who like sometimes they're just not talking to me. They're like, I
No.
have to go talk to these other characters. So I don't
And
know.
have to
I
do
definitely
something
believe in the
else.
muse. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
definitely.
like have to
There's
just like
something like,
open, like get vulnerable, open,
yep.
soften, like when our life gets hard and we get hard. And if we, I mean, so many artists deal with mental health stuff, right? And like when we go into our depressions and our dark spaces and fall down to the bottom of the rabbit hole as opposed to dancing around the edges. And like sometimes there's a lot to be written out of and you can write
Yeah,
yourself out
yeah,
of the bottom of the hole, but also like, and that fear that artists have sometimes about being healthy, like, oh, when I'm healthy, I'm not going to have anything to write. And
yeah.
I'm not a big believer in that, only because I think that you just start to brighten into the life you are currently living, as
Yeah,
opposed
yeah.
to opening and softening into the others. Like you don't have to be at the bottom to write your way out. You can also be joyful and full and thriving and still be writing, if you continue to keep that veil thin, if you continue to do the like self work, the magical work, the intuitive work of keeping the way that you are interacting in this thriving, joyful, otherwise world at that time in your life, that you're able to play within the veil, to let things
Yeah, yeah,
not
yeah.
be set and hard. Because when I get hard or when I get numb, that's when I got nothing, right? Like as an artist. And so
Yeah, it's true.
like how do I continue to have practices and ways and groups, and like you said, like what am I listening to? Maybe I'm forcing one thing, and I need to just write something completely different, like leave that book and just go and look at a leaf and write about the leaf, or like go and do this, or find write about just an utterly completely different genre or something, just to get to start listening again. Because I think that sometimes
Yeah,
we stop actually
yeah, yeah,
listening too. Sometimes they're not talking to us, and sometimes we've got some guards up. And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, so it's interesting. It's really interesting to me, like how we play into the spaces, especially when we're stuck.
No, it's totally true. One of the authors for SFP SBFBO recently, like had one of them had went on, and I laughed so hard at the tweet. They're like, "Is anybody else really concerned that they just talk to their characters all the time?" And then sometimes the people that they made up stop talking to them,
Yeah,
and I
you're like
laugh so hard.
rude.
I'm like, that is so true. But and it was just so true. And I'm like, oh my God. I was like, and they were like, are we okay? And I was like, I don't think we are, but we're fine. I was like, as long as you feel okay. But
Yeah.
yeah, it was just interesting, and it is like creatively, I had friends that, I've been friends with actors for a long time.
Mhm.
And I worked on a couple of very small, like just two small movies, like just like indie film things. And but it was so interesting to still know people from certain act communities in Michigan, and I had a couple friends that were like kind of the same way as authors that I know were like, I have to be depressed to play a depressed
Yeah.
person or
Yeah.
whatever. And I'm like, dude, that's
That's
tough.
not healthy.
I'm like, yeah, I'm like, it's not. And I'm like, I can't write that way, I guess. Like when I'm
Hmm.
feeling something like that, I actually take a break.
Yeah.
And I'll do something.
Yeah.
I'll read. I'll read. And that's where I was like really struggling at a time where, I was reading Jim Butcher, and like seeing Harry overcome made me be like, okay. And I think
Yeah.
that's where that audio narrator hit me so hard, like my son was
Yeah.
on his way, and
Yeah.
like it was great, but like part of me was kind of like, ooh, like how am I gonna,
Yeah.
do all these things, that make me, and I want to
Rightly
show
so.
him, you know what I mean? I'm like, I don't want my identity to be compromised. I've seen so many parents do that. I'm like, I want him to be like, oh, I go with my dad to Comic Con. I do podcasts with my dad, or whatever, I read or write with my dad, or whatever,
Yeah.
and people I've seen have been healthier and have healthy relationship with their kids, like invite their kids into their lives. But, at one
Yeah.
time I was like really worried. I was like, am I gonna be able to do this? And it's been tough,
Yeah. Oh
particularly
yeah.
writing. My wife, she even says, she'll be like, oh, did you get writing in today? I'm only really focused on 15 minutes a day right now, but when he
Good for
sleeps, my
you.
phone's in my hand. Yeah. And, she's been really good about helping me to keep the time, because
Oh,
to keep my
great
sanity,
partner.
I have to keep going. Yeah, right. Otherwise, I get, you know, get worse than Harry at
Hmm.
times, because that's just, I don't know if it's the muse or just how I get things out or whatever.
Well, and
But
I feel
yeah, it's,
different characters and different plots and things like that. What we're doing fundamentally is we're exercising some beast that lays within too, right?
ooh,
Of
that's a
like,
great way to put it. Yeah.
so like if you're not at the place where you can face that aspect of yourself, like I think of that with acting, like the given circumstances of the characters are very different than the given circumstances of my life. Like I might be playing a 13-year-old kid, or I might be playing a 25-year-old woman who like has huge, is part dragon and part witch, and like doesn't even know her dragon half, and like all these aspects of her. So my fundamental job is to pull from the parts of myself that I can understand with her. Like her given circumstances are different than mine, but I know sadness, I know anger, I know jealousy, I know love, I know. So these are like I've lived those things. So
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
to pull from within. But when I fail at that, or when I'm getting stuck, it's because I'm not willing to go there. I'm not
Yeah.
at a place of health that allows for this full spectrum of feeling, right? Because I feel like when we're in those places, we are just like actually not being able to fundamentally find a full spectrum of feeling, because we can't handle that particular beast. And so sometimes I'm always curious that it's like the block is actually coming from the fact that you are not at a place where you are ready yet
Yeah. Yeah.
to actually expunge or to like uh, rotor root that part of yourself,
Yeah.
you know? So I'm always that's why I say like having all those practices in place that keep you opening in and because I think sometimes the block is exactly that. It's actually an internal um not ready, not having the
Yeah.
capacity, the ability or otherwise to exercise that particular beast.
I think that's entirely true. Like, so like my son when he was born, and some people from this community know, like he had a rough start, like rough start. And like I was at the point in the hospital where like when he first came out, he wasn't moving. And like
Yeah.
I was really convinced he wasn't gonna make it. And I
Yeah.
didn't think that he was even had a heartbeat. And they're like, oh yeah, they're like doing stuff. They did like the doctor saved his life, saved his quality of life. Like, I'll get a Christmas card really soon,
Yeah.
birthday card every year. Like I told the guy, I was like, I cannot thank you enough for, it's like, that's my job. I'm like, you came in at a time where like you were pretty tired and everybody else, some people might have been like, I'm gonna go home because I don't technically have to be here. And I was like, we appreciate it, and it was awesome. But yeah, I mean, it was like I didn't get anything done for people like, oh, why are you behind on production? I'm like, oh, he had a baby. I'm like, now that I have a baby, I'm like, we were in NICU, and then
Yeah.
afterward, then you're trying to do everything. And my
Yeah.
wife didn't have a great time either, physically or
No.
any other thing, and
Like many,
so
many, many, many people who bear children, right? Like
yeah, like
so many people. It's like, what, you think the
oh,
baby's out and it gets easier? Hell no.
like I couldn't believe some people. I was like, and yeah, so, but like it was at a time, where were asking me like, are you gonna do this? I was like, I just don't think I can. Like
Yeah.
I didn't get anything. I didn't write anything for probably 4 months. And
Yep.
some of my friends were worried. They're like, oh, you write every day. And I was like, I just wasn't
Not right now.
ready,
Not right now.
Yeah.
Not right
And then
now.
now, so interesting because, and this is where I tell my students the same thing, my athletes, I'm like, you gotta have those failures or those
Yeah.
losses or just whatever in order to, really feel your successes or the
Yeah.
good days. You have to have the bad days. And it has like elevated, not that I would wish something bad on my family or myself, but like it's just crazy. Like it's elevated my emotional ability to write different
Mm,
scenes and different things.
mm,
Um, and
mm.
yeah, and it's like my friend recently was like, dude, I'm like, what? Is it not good? He was like, I don't know what happened to you. And I was like, oh, I lost it. And he's like, no, he's like, this is just totally different. Because like, being able to, I think, funnel certain emotions with the
Yeah.
muse, instead of keeping it when I was ready, instead of keeping it in, I put it on paper. And,
Yeah.
I felt really helpless at times,
Yeah.
particularly, in NICU. And, being able to, in a fantasy world, particularly, being able to have characters that feel that way, but have the
Yeah.
ability to change things,
Yes.
like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
um,
work it through. That is
yeah,
the journey. I think that's
yeah,
why there's
yep,
so many, like, I don't know about you, but like in my lifetime of being with story, I I really feel there are not that many stories. I forget what philosopher said there's like 7 stories that are being rewritten
yeah,
over and over and
yep,
over
yep,
with
yep, yep,
given
yep,
different given circumstances.
yeah, yeah,
And I it's funny because I absolutely and 1,000% agree with that and have seen that.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
100, I mean, I've narrated over 450 books. That means I've read them twice. I've worked on at least another 400 to 500, like when I was at Recorded Books, plus all of my personal reading and personal listening. That's like, you know, really a lot of story consumption and all the theater work, and, all this stuff. And what I see time and again is like there are not that many fundamental basic bare bones story structure things that are shifting.
yeah,
The given
yeah,
circumstances are shifting greatly, absolutely. But so there is something that we are working through. There is something that we are exploring, right? We're taking it from different angles and we're trying to come to it. And like the themes of hopelessness, like that is one of the biggest, most important themes that come up in books, right? Is like the dark night of
yeah,
the
yeah,
soul. Like, I'm sorry, Joseph Campbell
yeah,
had it really right. Like the hero's journey is real. And
yeah,
it doesn't mean that it has to be obvious or that we're always like it doesn't mean it's going to be predictive, but the elements, they are there because that is what we feel. We understand that we
yeah.
live in chaos, and the only thing we can have control over is how we react to things, and even that is only depending on how much
No,
self-work you're
it's true.
doing, only so
Yeah,
much in your control, right? So
yep,
it's really it's why I think so many like grief writing and things like that become so important for people. And like within the time frame of the trauma or of the big life thing that is going on, a lot of people don't do their art. Like I
yeah, yeah.
purposefully was like, I cannot be on stage. When my husband was going through his treatment, when after he passed, there was no freaking way that I couldn't access that vulnerability because I didn't even know who I
Oh, yeah,
was anymore, right?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
like it's so, and then there was a point where I was like, okay, now I can now I can open in. Now I can, and I was writing like during that, not during him being sick and treatment, because that was the really brutal brass tacks time of like, it's the
yeah,
NICU
yeah,
time. Right.
yeah,
And that, but after he passed, I would write once in a while. And it was just like, it was like a barfing of onto the page, but any sort of structural anything and acting in front of people, I was doing audiobooks, but I was, even then I was like, I would barely talk to anyone. I had total stranger danger. So my
oh, yeah, yeah,
interaction wasn't there because of a hopelessness, because of those types of emotion that hold us back from connection. And
yeah,
writing is connection. It's connection with the muse,
yeah,
and it's
yeah, yeah.
connection with self, and it's connection with your reader. Acting's got very similar aspects to it.
Oh, totally,
So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so it's fascinating to me, like all of the aspects that come into when block occurs, and how the shame and the fear end up being the things that shine the brightest, and like what are the different ways that we can change that ideology
yeah, yeah,
into saying, oh, okay, here is a time where I listen, here is a time where I change course, I soften, I do my own work to get
yeah.
back into my writing. Because yeah, I don't, it's not, art isn't always accessible. So
No, and I think you make a point too, where, I think that's why audiobooks, and audio dramas too, are on the
I love
rise
audio
again.
dramas.
Going back to what we said earlier. Yeah, I got some good ones on my feed right now. I have to go back to
Mm-hmm.
them. But it's just that I think again, when you're talking, I've had friends too where, they just, same situation, where they just couldn't. access the
Knowing.
vulnerability.
Yeah.
And and I've had friends that literally have told me I have writer's block, but I have actor's block,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
or they couldn't connect with a character or at that time, or something, and oh man, I never really considered it until a couple of years ago, talking to an actor friend of mine, and was like, oh, this is it is the same thing, because you're tapping the same type of pool of emotions, and
Yes.
somebody's verbally saying or displaying, the emotions or the trauma or the victories or whatever. But then, writers are just writing them down, not just, but,
Yet your
finding
body's
the
still
words to do it.
feeling it though. Like your
Yeah, it's the
body still
same
has to,
pool. Yep.
otherwise your writing will suck. Like if your
Yep.
heart is not racing, if you don't have a tear coming down your eye when you've written a book, like throw that book out, start again. because because like your body, right? Like you're if you're not going through it to some degree, that's the whole point of getting it onto the page. Like it's got to get onto the page because the body cannot hold it,
Yep.
right?
I feel so bad for I said my I have this one book, A Thief's Ambition. I'm like, I feel so bad for the characters. Like, it's definitely a redemption arc. I have a few of them in a trilogy, I'll have to say. But like, man, like I think I haven't gone back to it recently because it's just so hard
Yeah,
to, to I'm there for other things. I'm writing like light, fun fantasy and urban fantasy, or,
good for you.
or whatever. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
this is like a dragged out, super emotional, like
Mm,
people are going to be so upset with me after book one. And
yeah.
then, by book three, if they can make it through all three, I said to my friends, if you can make it through book three, like I can see a lot of people DNFing pretty close to
Yeah.
the end of book
Yeah.
one, being upset with
Yeah.
me. And then if you can make it to book three, though, I feel truly that it'll be one of the, like, you'll feel just so good. But like, I feel like I have to bring you so low, in order to come back up. And I
Yeah.
just feel like I haven't quite gotten back to there yet. And I
Yeah.
was talking to a friend of mine the other day about that. But yeah,
They're
but
hard
we
places to hang out.
they
That's a
really are.
hard that's a hard place to hang out. I've been
Yeah.
doing an urban fantasy series for Lisa Edmonds for gosh, like not 8 years now, I think.
Oh wow.
And the fundamental aspect that of that book, like what I feel it really is, it's a urban romance fantasy. So Felicity Monroe, which is my pseudonym for just all romance, just as genre work, is does those, and and it is exploring recovery from extreme early childhood trauma. That is really what's being explored. Like, yeah, it's an urban fantasy romance. However, it is like 9 years and 8 books of being with somebody who is evolving into their healing, which means they're going to get a rotor rooting. And that is a hard place to hang out. And I know that
Yeah.
the author, Lisa Edmonds, she she suffers from that because it's like there are times when it's hard for her to write those books because that
Oh
is a
yeah.
lot to unpack, right? And she's
Yep.
doing it gorgeously. I think it's such an incredibly healthy, important exploration. But there has been the end of some books where I have called, like, sent her a message crying and just saying, oh, I know I can feel where you're going to go in the next book, but I have to wait a year.
Oh yeah.
To wait a year. It's
I didn't
like,
think about that. That would kill
ah,
me for certain
oh,
books. Like,
oh my
yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think, ooh, I never thought of that. Yeah. That'd be really hard. I had one where,
It's
like,
so
I think it was like
important.
the back-to-back book. My first book I cried at, and then then the next one, I mean, it was R.A. Salvatore. I think it was, oh my God, like, um the Orc King, or I don't know. Oh, I don't know. It was the one before Gone Hedron, and he changed characters and stuff that I had literally grown up with, and I considered like close personal friends,
Yeah.
and just shattered my world. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, after the first book, that he did it to me, and then he did the next one even worse, and I was just like, oh my God, like,
Yeah.
and I can only imagine getting narration and then having to
Yeah.
wait, because I didn't have to wait a year. I had waited because I was tired of that. So I had, da da da, and now I'm kind of waiting till it gets a little further because I'll just blow through them. But I
Yeah.
can't imagine being the narrator having to wait a whole year
Wait a
to
whole year. That's why I was so happy to do that other series where I did all
Oh
9 in
man.
1 year, like Megan
Yeah, yeah,
Sienna
yeah.
Deutsch's series. And it was like I was so happy to actually get all 9 done in a year because I didn't have to wait, because she did the
Yeah,
same
yeah,
thing. I would leave her nasty messages saying
yeah.
saying, "Oh God, I'm going to start reading the other one right now, even though I haven't even recorded this one, because I can't not know. Like, I have to know if this is going to be a growth time or if she's going to recover, or like what, who's coming back, who made it, who didn't make it. Like, I need to know, especially, because so many fantasy and sci-fi books have battle in them, right? Like, have like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I did I did the end of the Vesic series by Eric Asher, and it was same
Mm.
thing. It was like
Oh yeah.
that was battle was happening in every book, man. Like, by the time I got to that series, it was battle, 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 and you never knew who was going to make it out of any book. And
Yeah,
each book
yeah.
was coming from different perspectives, so you didn't even know the full story of what had happened to somebody. They just disappeared in this book, and in the next book, it's their perspective, and you don't know if they're going to make it out of that book. Like, that's one of the things I love so much about fantasy, is that the worlds are so big and the circumstances are so heightened, um that you true, and there's factions often, and so you kind of don't know who's going to make it in so
Yeah,
many
yeah.
of those books. Yeah.
No, yeah, it's interesting. I just talked to author the other day, and I think it was Lee Conley. He's like, I went through a couple of his reviews for his first book, and people were like, "This guy is like George R. R. Martin on steroids." And I was like, I thought that was like, so interesting. So I shared that with him last or 2 weeks ago on an interview. It was so
That's
funny. He's
awesome.
like, I take that as a compliment. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
exactly. You're
it's
doing your
like,
job well.
yeah, but like you like never, he goes, don't like anybody in the second or third book. And like my
Yep.
friend was like reading the second book, and I'm actually on his first book right now, still Ritual of the Dead. But my friend was reading the second book, goes, my favorite character dies on like page 2. And he goes like,
Yeah.
or something like, something crazy. He was like, in it, he goes, I thought that he was gonna make it through all 3 books. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
Lee went into my group on my podcast group on Facebook. He's like, don't assume or something. I laughed so hard. But that's what he was like just talking about in our interview. He's like, I want to convey that this is a situation with these zombie-like creatures that, particularly book 2, that, now there's all these heightened, not necessarily heightened risks, but like they were always like that, like you just don't know if you're gonna go down, with your wagon and your family, and there's going to be like an army of undead, or you're going to run
Yeah.
into another group who's, coming in, and, and I said to him, I was like, it kind of just feels like old school, like an old school world, and he's like,
Yeah.
that's what I wanted, we're just, the tomorrow's not guaranteed for you or anybody,
Yeah.
and I think that, we talked about some different themes with that. So I think that when
Yeah.
you can, convey that, it's really good. But
Yeah.
I
It's
I
pretty
don't think I can
special.
do it. I could feel like,
Yeah.
send me your thoughts now. Like, I don't care what you're thinking. Like, give me a list of who survives and who dies,
Yeah,
and
that's
we can do
when you
that.
get your beta reader stuff back and people are cussing you out, you're like, "You're welcome. I will be printing
Yeah,
that."
yeah. If I were our narrator, I'd be like, I am narrating your next book in Elmo, okay? Only Elmo voice. And
You've
you're
got
not
to
gonna
give
know
me.
at what point in the book it's at. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
That's really funny.
Oh my gosh.
So we're kind of wrapping up on time. So I just wanted to make sure that we had time to, talk about some of the, products and things like that, and especially where people, can find your work. I wanted to make
Mm,
sure we didn't skip that last question there. We can
yeah.
always go back to some of these other ones.
I
We
know
were on a
we
roll.
killed that list.
Speaking of the muse, I never wanna somebody and I were talking like 2 weeks ago, and we just got going on something, and I was like, oh, it was HC Newell and I, and she's like, oh, do you want to circle back? I'm like, no, this is like good stuff, it was like something that
Yeah.
was, a couple things that people needed to know, and it was really interesting to us, and we got to a couple questions at the end, but I was like, I don't really care. I said I just use them as a guide, but
Yeah.
sometimes you just get something going, and I'm like, never gonna ruin it. I'm a teacher, so when you get the
Yeah,
magic in the classroom, you just go with it.
exactly,
The
exactly.
lesson can wait till tomorrow as long as the purpose is there.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to make sure that you
Mhm.
told the audience where we can find your work, your past projects, your socials, things like that. Obviously people that
Yeah.
have been here before know that anything you give me we'll put in the description, but I just want to make sure I had a little bit of time to share those with people. So
Yeah, absolutely. So, as a rights holder author, you can get a hold of me through my website, which is Erin Moon Actor, or you can also use Erin Moon VO. I own a bunch of different ones that all go to the same place.com. So Erin, Erin, last name Moon, like the orb in the sky. And yes, I was born with that name. Um, VO.com is probably the easiest one to remember. And also for narrators who are looking for coaching or authors who are doing memoir, particularly, is where most listening audiences are more willing to accept author reads because they do differ from actor reads. So also I work with authors on memoir kind of stuff as well.
oh,
Or
cool.
just like if you have questions and I can at least direct you in the right place. The website's usually the easiest. As far as my work goes, I narrate under the two names, as I mentioned. In general, you don't speak about an narrator's pseudonym, but I am open about my pseudonym because it's just genre work. Anything that's under the romance genre, it goes under Felicity Monroe because it's got a particular, people will seek out romance based work. And even when the romance is closed door or sweet romance, it still goes under Felicity, everything to the door wide open
Hmm.
work. And I've done a lot of fantasy, particularly, and some like short kind of novella and fun stuff, sci-fi, um, under Felicity Monroe, and then Erin Moon. So as long as you go into like if you're on Libro.fm or Audiobooks.com or Audible.com, as long as you type in my name, Erin Moon or Felicity Monroe, and Monroe is Munroe, because I did indeed spell it wrong when I chose it. You're welcome. Um, so I read for a living and I still can't spell, folks. Yay. So those are the two names that you can search for and search the stuff that I did. And just a couple, just because I did mention them, Eric Asher, I did the latter part of the Vesic series. And then I also mentioned Megan Sienna Deutsch. It's the Dowser series. And then I mentioned Lisa Edmonds, and that's under Felicity Monroe, and that is the Alice Worth series, just because I did
Oh,
mention
cool.
their work. So I want to
No,
honor
appreciate it.
that.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to honor
Yeah,
that
that's
I
awesome.
spoke of those authors. Yeah.
And that actually goes into my next thing that I've really been trying to get people to remember, on this podcast and on our socials and in our podcast group. And people are probably tired of me saying it right now, but I'm going to keep saying it. I just want to make sure that people are, reviewing all and any products that you get, whether it's indie or traditional, because, people such as Aaron, work on these things. You have
And
producers,
tag
editors,
us. And
yeah, like
tag us.
so
Like
many
the one,
people, so many
so
people.
many authors miss tagging their narrators. Like I'm telling you, narrators want authors to do well because we work with the authors. Like we work as, remember, we're like aunties and uncles, right? So like really make sure to tag your narrators on every single post about that book that they have narrated. Like even early on, if you're allowed to say who you cast, like tag them in the cast post, tag them in everything,
Yeah,
because guaranteed they will share it because we
yeah,
care.
yeah.
Like we love what we do, we care about what we do. And for me, that you can find me on socials at Mooney Books, Mooney Books, or at Felicity Monroe on all the
Oh,
socials. Yeah.
well,
But
it's
yeah,
funny
that's
because
a
I just
big one
always
for
see
authors.
people. Well, I always see. Don't get me wrong. Like you should be sharing your artists, but it's just so funny to me that everybody forgets about their audio
Yeah.
narrators and everybody else. I'm like,
Yeah.
what about editors too?
Yeah. Oh my
There's just so many
gosh.
people,
Get your
that
editor's work.
you know. Yeah, exactly. I tell people all the time, I'm like, I was like, I don't get paid for this. I was like, I'm just trying to learn some things and meet some people. And, I was
Yeah.
like, if I can connect some people along the way, that's my podcast group. Eventually, I want it to be like really cool. Now we got people, like Amy went in was like, hey, I need some work for because I had a project fall through. So that was cool. I think we did, we were able to find somebody.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. For me, that's like awesome, taking something that was in my head and all of a sudden now, connecting people and,
Yeah.
getting more things out there and building the community, I think to me is, has always been really important. But yeah, so
Yeah.
I think anytime you can just share some, I share things all the time. People are like, oh, thank you. I'm like, don't have to thank me, but I appreciate it. But I'm like, you don't have to thank me. I'm like just
Yeah.
trying to, getting somebody's book out there, get somebody's cover out there, that gets
Yeah.
somebody's editor out there, that gets hopefully them an audiobook, gets, you and Amy
Yeah.
or whoever in the community, some work, it's just
And we know
trying to
people like,
recycle
so
that. So
contact us if you're like, I'm actually, I need a guy voice who comes from this cultural background. We know people. Like, I've been in this industry for 18 years. Like, I want to live from an abundance mindset. Dear God, I want to always, always anchor into abundance because it is such a better place to live from than
yeah,
scarcity.
I agree.
So,
Yep.
like, yeah, that
No,
open and
totally.
available to talk to people about stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. Well, Erin, thank you so much for coming on. I did just want to mention to our audience that Erin and Amy will be back with me with a third guest in just a little while, a couple months from now, for one of our seminars. And we're actually going to be talking about a couple of different topics involving their works and, audio narrations, talking about, audio narrator and, author relationships. So just make sure that you guys take a look at our message boards and things. The new website actually is up, so it'll actually be in the description as well for the podcast. That way you can actually go and get up-to-date knowledge on all of those dates and those upcoming interviews. So just wanted to point that out before we get done. Erin, thank you so much for coming on. It was really
Thank
fun talking to you
you.
last week. It was really fun talking today. I look forward to emailing and talking to you and Amy and our other guests in the future. So again, if
Thank
there's
you so
anything I can
much.
do at all or you need something, just feel free to, also email me and go in the podcast group and, we can share whatever you need or any news, updates, things like that. If there's anything I can do at all, just let me know. So,
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for
yeah, not a
listening too.
problem. Have a good rest of the day, Erin. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.